The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. This is Malcolm Orekoya from NetUtils. Thank you very much for attending the webinar today, titled AI is set to accelerate. Is your organization ready? We're going to run the webinar for probably about 45 minutes plus or so. As you're listening, if you have any questions, can you pop them into the questions box in the GoToWebinar console, and we will basically address all the questions at the end of the session. Thanks. Spare me a second. Seems like we might be having an audio issue. I can't hear, so just give us a second.
Since the standard started, since .11 didn't have letters after it, which was the first Wi-Fi. That's how old I am.
Brilliant, guys. So we're going to try and jump in and start off with Will.
Hi guys, it's Cara here. Sorry, I'm actually just going to start that from the beginning. Apologies.
Good day, everyone. My name is Malcolm Orekoya. I'm the CTO at NetUtils, and welcome to today's webinar titled AI is set to accelerate. Is your organization ready? We're going to have a brief conversation style webinar with the three of us, and Will and Simon are going to introduce themselves. Will, do you want to go first?
Wonderful. Okay, so thank you, Malcolm. My name's Will Garside. I'm a former broadcaster and journalist, and for the last, oh God, it sounds so old, 25 years I've been writing about technology for various magazines and organizations.
My name's Simon Round. I'm a regional sales manager for Mist in the UK and Ireland. That means I kind of work for the part of the business that is focused on the AI-driven enterprise, and I myself have been in talking about wireless and networking and working in this industry since the standard started, since .11 didn't have letters after it, which was the first Wi-Fi. That's how old I am.
Brilliant, guys. So we're going to try and jump in and start off with Will to just kind of have an overview of basically artificial intelligence and what it is.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting subject. I've been writing about AI for many years. And I remember doing stuff back in the day with Hadoop and MapR and companies like that. And I remember an expert that I spoke to, Ted Dunning. He always used to say, "There is no AI. It's just machine learning, and one day, eventually, we'll get to this world of AI." But I mean, I'd argue that it's pretty close now. We see things that are amazing. How data is connected and technologies are enabling us to do things that we just weren't possible. Simon, what's your view? What do you think? How do you think AI is now? Is it a hype or happening?
Well, I agree with you that AI, as in something that's going to pass the Turing test, something that you can will pretend that it's human, That's kind of still a science fiction piece, but AI as a usable technology, and as you say, better to term it as machine learning. Machine learning we're seeing, as you mentioned yourself, across all sorts of applications, whether it be, self-driving cars from Tesla, or the algorithms from places like University of Surrey that will look for congenital heart defects, and can do that to a really, really strong accuracy just by supervised learning, by looking. We fed in, not me, but the university fed in, millions of samples of what a heartbeat sounds like with a congenital defect, and therefore it's pretty easy within one heartbeat then for that particular algorithm to look for and diagnose you with a congenital heart defect. So I suppose the question is, why have we not been using these machine learning algorithms for other applications, for specifically in my market, which is the networking market? Because there are lots of cool things that we could do with a machine learning algorithm, whether it's supervised learning or more importantly for us, unsupervised learning, which will look for raw data, will look for anomalies, look for insights. And we have this thing where we prefer to use the acronym actionable insights, or the term actionable insights for AI, because we kind of think it's a little bit less sci-fi. And in the real world, it's a proper outcome. It's an actionable insight to enable you to improve your business outcomes for various different reasons.
But when you think about AI, the networking industry, telecoms industry to a degree, have been not the poster child for artificial intelligence. We don't think about our network being smart. I mean, Malcolm, you guys build a lot of networks. Do your customers say to you, why aren't our networks smarter?
No, not at all. And actually, when we were talking the other day, it was interesting talking about the bigger organizations like Facebooks, the Googles, the Netflixes, etc., who have already been leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning for a while. But obviously, those are huge networks. And ultimately, as we whittle down to the larger enterprise and then the smaller, medium-sized enterprises, those guys initially are not really worried about that, because first of all, it looks like something that they can't easily achieve. Imagine an organization that's 50 to 100 users trying to do something that Google's doing. It just looks like so far-fetched that they're not even going to try and consider it. But actually now, this is what we're talking about, because the same user experience that a 50-user organization requires is the same user experience that a 50,000 user organization requires, right? So we're bringing those things that the big guys are doing slowly down to the smaller guys or the smaller organizations and making it possible. And the way that we try and do that, actually, and Simon can talk about this, is via the correct technology and architecture that fits in with those smaller organizations.
Well, it is true. Fundamentally, the underlying architecture was missing, which is you need something that will be able to scale both up and across for different applications, but also for storage and compute in terms of analyzing all that data. These algorithms are pretty process intensive, and so it is important that you have a modern cloud-based architecture. And it's interesting you mentioned big architectures and big companies like Google and Netflix, especially. Netflix, actually, forgive me for boasting, they're a customer of ours, and actually they recognized something that we did. The first innovation that Mist started with, the clean sheet of paper, that Mist, the company that's acquired by Juniper, that informs our AI-driven enterprise strategy. They recognized that actually we built a modern cloud. We hadn't just taken the appliance code that every other networking manufacturer was kind of anchored to. We were able to start with a clean sheet of paper and start with what we term as a microservices architecture. That's where we basically abstract all of the cool things. Netflix, example, they did it in 2009. It took about 3 years to do it, but basically they abstract all of the cool things they do: the streaming service, the library service, the AI itself that tells you what you might want to watch next. Sometimes it doesn't work for me that well, but it's still AI. It's looking for patterns within my viewing and giving me insights back as to what I might want to watch next. All of those things are abstracted into individual microservices that discreetly manageable and maintainable containers of code that talk to each other via a centralized REST API bus. And it's that kind of, sounds esoteric, but it's that kind of philosophy that really was needed. And the lack of it was holding back the industry from delivering, these outcomes by leveraging machine learning architectures. We need that scalability. We need that ability to maintain and develop at the speed of the endpoint, because every time we have a problem with one of those little microservices, we just unpick that little bit of code rather than having to unpick the entire monolithic code base and fix something here and break something over here. And it also, because it's on a modern AWS or GCP cloud, we can then scale up and out and deliver all sorts of compute capabilities to deliver, those anomaly detections, those actionable insights, those cool things that are fundamentally going to deliver those outcomes that machine learning will give.
We talk about outcome. I think that's the killer thing. Is when I started writing about networks and telecoms, networks were distinct from the applications. You think about the old client-server model. It was application does something here on our server or on my desktop. Then, you know what? I might send some information somewhere else and let it run somewhere else. Client-server, nice and predictable. Now every application is tied to some kind of back-end server, and the network has become the point of, I'll say failure, but the point of contention and often the point of latency. And that user experience, that's all we care about as users. What is machine learning or AI going to do to the user experience if it's done well?
Let me just quickly pick on a point that Will's just mentioned there is actually the importance of the user experience versus the network. So one of the things that historically we've always focused on is network availability. Is the network fast? Is it available? Is it redundant and resilient and all of that sort of stuff? But there's a huge disconnect between network availability and user experience. And the more we can bridge the gap between that, then the better the user experience is going to become. And actually, that's where AI comes in, because the network can be available. All the green lights are flashing, no alerts anywhere, everyone's happy. But the user experience could be terrible. And we've actually, as an MSP, obviously we manage various networks, wired, wireless, etc. And we've experienced this firsthand with customers where you might have a monthly or quarterly catch up with a customer where your review of their network, their tickets and all that stuff looks very good, and you're preparing for a fairly nice conversation, only to find out that actually over the last month, they've had a terrible experience with their Wi-Fi, with their applications, etc. But from your perspective, the ticket numbers are low, troubleshooting is low, availability's been high, and everything looked good from our perspective. So how do we bridge the gap between that historic and legacy focus on network availability and actually what customers only care about, literally only care about? The only reason why a customer even cares what the network is doing is because of their user experience. So actually the primary focus for customers, whether it be huge Netflix or small 20 user organization, is user experience.
Experience is the new uptime, is a mantra that we have, and I totally think that's what that's exactly what you're articulating there, Malcolm. And we talk about this a lot. Experience is more important. And actually, Will, one of the things that you just said about, well, the network is the point of contention, that's a really interesting point, because often it's perceived as the point of contention, as Malcolm says, but is it really the point of contention? I mean, is it really the thing that's affecting user experience? And I suppose, we're all managed service providers. Certainly I am in my house, whether it's my wife, working from home, or my little boy. And I do tell this story a lot, but it's the first time it's been recorded, I think. But basically, it's true that he is going to blame the Wi-Fi every time. He's always going to blame my Wi-Fi. He's trying to shoot something on Fortnite, and it's suddenly laggy for him. That's a term he came up with. He said, "Daddy, your Wi-Fi is rubbish. It's laggy. I can't shoot this kid on the other side of the continent with Fortnite." And I'm like, well, actually, son, it might not be the Wi-Fi, right? It could be the cable that connects the Wi-Fi to the switch. It could be the switch connection to the router. It could be something to do with the DHCP or the IP addressing. It could be something to do with the DNS service from my internet provider. It could be something that's well outside of my control. It could be his Xbox. It could be his device needs upgrading. And our kind of primary aim is to try and help No longer is it good enough just to say, well, the access point's fine, or the switch is fine, or and then still expect, as Malcolm said, that the customer to be happy. If the user experience is still poor, we should be able to leverage those machine learning algorithms to look for insights, as I say, actionable insights, that tell us outside of just our own environment, adjacent systems as well, why it is that that little boy can't shoot that avatar on the other side, that's manned by somebody else on the other side of the continent. And to me, that's the fundamental and first and optimum use of AI within the networking industry. It is to prove user experience. It is to assure whether it's a wired or a wireless connection, because that is the primary aim. And uptime of networks is important, but experience is really what we're trying to look for.
I guess there's also there's a bit of an assumption sometimes as well that AI, new technology. I'm not a Luddite. I've written about technology for 2 decades. But when we hear about new technology, if you're an operational person, if you're in IT, there's sometimes suspicion around it. Is it going to deliver? Are there real world actionable things that I can get from this? Is going to be a huge amount of CapEx, OpEx. I mean, the practicalities of deploying AI and machine learning are often unknown. I mean, do you get pushback sometimes from people saying, "Oh no, Simon, don't need any AI here. We're quite happy with our horse and carriage"?
We do, and actually, I put this. It's an interesting way you put it, and there's 2 things I think. Right, firstly, there's this fundamental. I think people think that there's a lot of hype around AI within networking, and there has been. Being honest with you, we are, and I'm going to boast now, we are top right-hand corner of the Gartner Magic Quadrant because we're leading the way with this kind of technology. But you will see, as soon as somebody does that, you can't move from, frankly, with the bottom left to the top right of the Magic Quadrant without kind of, frightening some of the establishment. And we see a lot of marketing around AI, but we're not necessarily seeing real world stuff. So it starts to look like we're just talking the same language as everybody else. So we kind of have to prove concept by often enabling our partners to actually do that, put the technology in and show outcomes. But the second thing is people don't actually immediately get where we're coming from. So if you were to ask the average network manager, and I do this every day, I speak to network managers about our technology, and I'll say, what's wrong with your network? What's wrong with your Wi-Fi? What's wrong with your network switches? And they say, no, nothing whatsoever. So I'll say, well, why aren't we speaking? And they'll go, well, because they're about to come into support, or we need to replace because it's too old. And then I go, okay, right, and I've learned not to ask a question that way, because I'll start to give a demonstration about what it is that we're doing, and I'll start to show insights. I'll start to show root cause analysis of why it is that a particular person within our demos, within the environment is having a particular problem, and it might be to do with the fact they're on the wrong iOS, or it might be to do with their iPhone, or it might be to do with the fact that there's a problem with latency at the gateway, or whatever it is, right? And they'll go, oh, and I've had this happen to me several times. Oh, I could have fixed that problem, with that. Or that particular person, he had the same, or she had the same issue with a device in our office last week. And I was like, well, you said to me there was nothing wrong with your network. And it's that divorce between whether there's anything wrong with the network, because frankly, the network is doing its job, but it's whether the user experience is good or not. And people kind of, as people with responsibility with networks, they'll often sort of assume that, well, or once I've got a technology that I know is good, that's good enough. Well, connected is not good enough. Good enough is a decent experience, and that's where we're coming from.
Yeah, so there are a couple of things I wanted to pick up. Actually, quite a lot of things. I'm going to see if I can remember. As you were talking, I was thinking of obviously our user experience at NetUtils as an MSP. And first of all, as an MSP, it is no longer good enough to basically say to the customer that, Mr. Customer, I manage and monitor X, Y, and Z infrastructure, wired, wireless, et cetera, et cetera. They're all showing lights that have all been up. So please don't involve me because your user experience is crap. Everything's all green, right? Because ultimately you're going to lose that customer down the line. Why? Because all the customer cares about is user experience. They don't care that everything is green and all the lights are on, right? So as an MSP, we're going to have to find how to bridge that gap between the availability and the user experience, as I've already said. And we're talking about the technologies like Juniper and Mist that can do that for us. But what that ultimately means is the responsibility of the MSP becomes slightly more, right? So you can't say network's fine, application's not my responsibility, go talk to the application first. You need to be able to look at other things that participate in the communication across the network. So you mentioned things like firmware, iOS, we mentioned things like DNS servers or anything else within the communication path, authentication servers and DHCP servers. And, I mean, a DHCP server, DNS server is not technically part of your network infrastructure, is it? It's a server somewhere that's dishing out IP addresses or resolving host names to IP. So being able to get visibility of that and actually give some information and insight, actionable insight, as you say, Simon, to the customer, even though it's not your remit, so to speak, is actually going to start differentiating the really good MSPs from the legacy sort of standard MSPs that focus on availability and green lights being on. So that's the first thing, and that's certainly why an organization like NetUtils are looking at what Juniper is doing with Mist and trying to be one of the sort of pioneers or one of the MSPs that are pushing to use that kind of technology for, especially for the small medium enterprise, I must say. So it's always a bit daunting for small medium enterprise, let's say sub 300 users, to hear about Facebook and Netflix and Walmart and all the huge organizations doing amazing things with this technology. Ultimately, they think, how's that going to help my 200 users? Do you know what I mean? That's what it boils down to. So the other thing that pops into my mind is obviously what's our responsibility as an MSP then to be able to bring that technology and that innovation to the small medium enterprises, and how can they use it? And we'll talk about CapEx and OpEx. Well, again, part of our responsibility is to make it affordable and usable for the organization. So rather than the historic way of thinking where you say, okay, well, this sounds like I'm going to have to do a huge forklift upgrade of my infrastructure, switches, firewalls, routers, access points all have to be upgraded. So we're using this awesome, technology that's got the right architecture, and then we'll be able to leverage the AI data that comes out of it. Obviously, that sounds really expensive, right? So you want to be able to offer options that are more OpEx-based for the organization, maybe less ownership of kits and more sort of leasing and that sort of stuff. And again, the MSP plays a big part in this sort of stuff. And again, the vendor like Juniper and Mist help with supporting the MSP to deliver that sort of flexible consumption model for the organization. So that was the second thing that popped into my mind. And then the third thing is reduction of help desk tickets and reduction of troubleshooting, and basically just reduction in the use of the the IT admin's time in the network. Again, sort of talking to the sort of small medium enterprise, if you can see a reduction in your help desk tickets, a reduction in the number of or the amount of time that you spend looking for the problem, like root cause analysis and all that sort of stuff, then that starts showing you the benefits of investing in this type of technology. So sorry, there was quite a lot of stuff that was popping into my mind. I had to throw all of it out there, but there's a lot.
The point of AI and AI operations and AI offering that third resource, we call it a virtual network assistant, to both MSPs and to customers, is to enable customers and MSPs to run leaner and more efficiently to deliver those user experience outcomes and proactively look for things like problems with the authentication to reduce costs. So that scales down. Yes, you're right. We are well known for being in sort of 4 of the top 10 companies in the world, but it scales all the way down to sort of 100, 10, 15 employees, because those outcomes, improving your ability to deliver an AI-driven service operation are so critical, and they scale down as well as up.
I was going to say one thing. At the start of this conversation, we all agreed that enterprises of all sizes are moving more of their infrastructure and applications into the cloud. And now networks are acting as that bridge between distributed users, multiple cloud services, their own data centers, their own apps. Are we now, as MSPs, thinking my MSP hat, do we have to now look inside those clouds and have awareness and visibility to what's happening at the boundaries into those clouds, and then potentially the metrics that those clouds giving back to us? I mean, Simon, are you guys working with the AWSs and Googles of this world to get some insight into what's happening inside these clouds from a network perspective?
You know, our product teams, we are on both of those clouds. Will, to answer that question, we have certainly in the States we have instances on both AWS and GCP. We very much leverage the very latest concepts around that, as evidenced by the microservices discussion. So it's very much a scale out and scale up style philosophy and architecture that we leverage. So
you can see the metric of the delays as the network goes into a cloud and as data comes back from that cloud. That's now a known element. And if you have a situation where an application is not performing, if you know the data went in at 1847 and 0.1 of a second and came out 8 seconds later, that 8-second delay is not the network.
No, absolutely. And you know, with visibility of kind of our own devices, we can start to troubleshoot every bit of that network. So once you've got visibility, the more you can deliver. But I do agree with you. This is another aspect of a modern managed service provider. I agree with you, Malcolm, when you say there's a new breed. Well, I'm putting words in your mouth, but we're seeing a new breed of managed service provider that will leverage AI operational things like virtual network assistance and, you know, Wi-Fi or wired assurance, experience assurance, and start to deliver more to their end customers. But I think if you have visibility of all of those clouds as NetUtils and all of those aspects, then applying the same philosophies to across every aspect of your managed service means that you're going to exponentially almost square every time you add something to it. That sounds like an obvious sales pitch, but I'm sure you can see the benefits or articulate the benefits of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say we can even finish off on some of the stuff that you talked about there, Simon, in terms of troubleshooting and understanding and leveraging the data and the artificial intelligence that the correct technology and architecture provides you. So if I looked at it from a customer perspective, you know, they're dealing with their own network, et cetera, they might hear the last 2 minutes of our conversation and sounds, oh, bloody hell, that means I need to go hire some AI specialists. It's going to cost me 80 grand a year, and there's not very many of them out there. I mean, we're not going to talk about the skills shortage in our industry. We know that too well, right? So I find it interesting to actually talk about, you know, what you said, the virtual network assistance, and maybe just highlight some of the benefits of doing that. I'll let you talk about it, Simon, but I guess in summary, what we're trying to do is actually take away the script guys and, you know, the easy programming knowledge and actually make it user friendly and in normal user language, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you know, when you phone up a help desk and they go through, have you turned it on and off again? Classic IT crowd sort of thing. Because actually turning it on and off again might actually replicate the issue. Because one of the problems we often have is an intermittent fault. Perhaps it'd be nice if we could record when there was an issue and then just give you that. Well, we actually do that. But a virtual network assistant is exactly that. It's a conversational engine that, you know, your first line support people and your managed service providers can interrogate, start to troubleshoot issues around user experience and other issues. And the other cool thing that ours does is it will proactively look for faults within the network, and not just within the network, but within adjacent systems, as I say, because we know what it looks like when, you know, we know what the data looks like when there's a faulty cable, so we can model that and then say with pretty good accuracy, in the same way that we talked about congenital heart failure, we can say, well, that's what a faulty cable looks like. You might want to go and fix that. Or there's a missing VLAN, and we can even do that with other people's switches. Or there's a problem with the authentication server. You know, we know what that looks like. Or getting back to Wi-Fi, because Wi-Fi is always the first thing that everybody blames. There's a coverage hole or a capacity hole, and it's proactively finding those things and offering them to you to even maybe integrate into your ITSM, such as ServiceNow, to automatically raise service tickets and trouble tickets. That's really what AI is doing. It's taking away things that should be automatable. And that's really what our virtual network assistant does. And I think where it's critical with those new breed of managed service providers, sorry, Malcolm, is that actually that's kind of a third resource that all of you can use, everybody can use, and we end up with this almost co-source where actually you can get, your customers can get in and see things, but you can also help provide a better, more efficient service with it. And I think that is the next breed of a managed service provider.
I know it's slightly adjacent, but the idea of network as a service, I know, is a particularly fast growing area. In your view, Simon, most things we receive now, whether that's electricity, gas, or water, they're services. Mm-hmm. Ocado, it's a service. Having shopping delivered to your home, it's a service.
Yep.
We are starting to become service dependent. I find it strange that even though the cellular network is a service, traditional LANs and WANs and corporate enterprise networks have never really moved to an as-a-service model. But that is changing, though. What's your view, Simon?
No, I agree with you, and I think it's all in a weird way, because in a weird way, I think the network industry has been a bit slow in lots of things, as we say. But I think it's because it's sort of the big players, if you'll forgive me, and I'm not going to name names or anything, but the big players are invested in maintaining the status quo, aren't they? So yeah. I think network as a service is or as a utility, as you put it, right, is actually the logical extent, and it needs these modern innovative service providers to package it in a way that's consumable to the customer and good value, and concentrates on user experience rather than just whether the thing's working or not, right? So and I think, in my opinion, certainly in my experience, based on sort of 20 years being in the industry, I do think we've been talking about network as a service for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and you're right, it hasn't actually ever really developed beyond maybe some clever stuff around OPEX, but actually genuinely as a utility, I think it needs the ability to focus on user experience rather than network health to make it worthwhile. And if you'll forgive me going on about it, it's a mantra that I think is worth repeating.
What has been the catalyst? Is it cloud? Is it hybrid working? Is it the pandemic? The last few years, we've seen a lot more adoption. Why do you think that is?
Sticking to or maintaining the status quo is a big one, and that's not just from the big vendors. Actually, that's for everyone. A network manager that has 100 users in his organization, and a network manager that has 10,000 users in his organization also wants to maintain the status quo, because they're used to their switches, they're used to their wireless access points, and they're used to managing and monitoring that. But also, again, don't want to go on too much about it, but the skills shortage. They have their staff know exactly what they're doing, and they don't want to go retrain or learn something new. And there's also a perception, as I mentioned already, that, in order to deal with this new world of AI and machine learning, you need this like ridiculous knowledge, and historically, looking back 10, 15 years where the big players have started looking at this stuff, yes, you do need those really intelligent, guys and girls to start doing all this stuff. So like with everything, it takes time, and it starts from the big guys that have the money, the resource, et cetera, to start moving things forward. And then slowly but surely, it will whittle down to the medium-sized, large, and small enterprises. So it's a combination of different things. I think now, cloud, I've been in the industry 20 years as well. So I remember when AWS was launched. I remember when Office 365 was launched and all of that stuff. I remember seeing all the Office 365 posters in the underground and thinking, a few people are signed up, but no one cares. Now, look at it, right? I literally remember it. So everything basically takes a bit of time. It has to be done first at the top by the big guys, then they perfect it, and then they start sort of bringing it down to the lower guys, et cetera, et cetera. I think ultimately network as a service is going to be
something that's delivered like a utility, like you say, Will, because no one really cares about what model of router your ISP is giving you in your house, what firmware it's running, what cable it connects to, whether it's fiber or, no one cares. All they care about is what's the Wi-Fi and how is it running. And that's what's going to happen with networks as well. No one's going to care what vendor switches are in, what firewalls are in, what routers are in, what wireless access points are in. All they're going to care about is the user experience and the service. And they would actually be paying, preferably through a flexible OpEx model, for the user experience. And so it is the MSP and the vendor's responsibility over time to make sure that delivering all of that kit that's going to enable the network experience is a broadband provider just sends you the router and they just say plug it up, and when you plug X, Y, and Z in, then you'll see this SSID, then you go. And that's all you want them to do. Okay, slightly different. You might have to plug up like 5 switches, 1 firewall, and 20 APs, but it's basically the same thing. Plug it up, you get this, then we start delivering you that experience. So I think AI, leveraging AI is going to lend itself to network as a service, and probably in another 10 years time, hopefully we might still be in the industry. But we'll remember this conversation.
I actually think in 10 years, we won't ever have this conversation. I honestly believe that. I think the reason why is that people culturally have changed their expectations. The idea, and I'll give you my favorite analogy, which I've used many, many times. In the 1900s, if you wanted electricity, the early 1900s, you would buy a generator, and there would be a team of people who'd fill the generator up with fuel, and your factory or your building would have electricity. Now that's a CapEx plus an OpEx, and if it breaks down, you have no electricity. So big organizations would buy 2 generators and stockpile oil to fuel those generators. Can you imagine having that conversation now with a customer? Can you imagine that conversation with electricity? Nobody can, but the networking conversation is still that.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
But it's going to change. I think in 10, 15 years' time, it's going to have moved on. But I think Simon said it as well, that the network industry has just historically been slow, but we will get there. So I think maybe to, I guess, close on the conversation, going back to the topic of the conversation, AI is set to accelerate. Is your organization ready? And organization actually represents quite a different set of organizations. So there's the vendor organization, and the end user organization, and the MSP organization. Inevitably, because AI is set to accelerate, and there's literally nothing you can do about it, it will happen. Because, like I said, it starts from the top. Top guys already done it, so it will happen. It's already happening, right? So that's a done deal, right? Is your organization ready? Well, we can see Juniper and Mist as a vendor as an organization already. NetUtils as an MSP as an organization are getting ready. I'm not saying we're ready, but we're getting ready. And hopefully what we're trying to do is enable the enterprise as an organization to also get ready to do this.
I was going to say, I think NetUtils are ready in my experience. So I think we're good to go, and we just need to find the right people that are also like-minded.
With my totally impartial hat on, I think one of the things that are missing from an organisation is a little bit of courage. I think you're right in that notion. I think you both said it, that there's this status quo, don't want to rock the boat. Most of these tools are software-based tools. They are subscription-based tools. They are as a service. If I'm unhappy with my gas, water, or energy supplier, I'll change. I think that courage, I use the word courage very precisely, is something that we all need to have a bit of, and not be scared of it.
Perfect. Well, on that note, guys, I want to say a big thank you to Will and Simon for joining in the conversation. It's been very insightful and very enjoyable, as always. Have a lovely day, and thank you again.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for listening into that. I can't see any questions that have been put into the question box at the moment. So maybe give 1 or 2 seconds just to see if there are any on anyone's mind. If not, then we'll bring the webinar to an end and thank everyone for attending. Have a great day.
Thanks very much, guys. We'll follow up with you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.